Today, we're going to see how we can consume an MCP server in Copilot Studio using Open Authorization 2.0 from a security perspective. I'm Paolo Pialorsi, and I'm a senior developer advocate in Microsoft, and my focus is to spread the knowledge about how you can extend Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that's why I'm here today. So let's move to the actual content. And first of all, let me share with you that this demo is part of a set of labs that we have in the Copilot Developer Camp, which is a set of videos, training materials, hands-on lab that you can use to learn how to build agents to extend Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if you want to dig into this topic and many more, go to aka.ms/copilot.camp. But moving to the actual content of today, I want to start with a question. Why do we need to consume an MCP server with open authorization? You might be wondering why. Well, there are multiple reasons, in my opinion. One, of course, is that you want to protect your data. So that's totally fine to have a bunch of MCP servers to support your agents, but it is definitely fundamental and important to protect the data that your agents access through the MCP servers. So using security and using specifically open authorization, you can have scoped short-lived access tokens that allow you to consume your MCP servers under the identity of the user who is interacting with the agent. You can use the open authorization protocol to authorize access to the tools based on who the user is then, so that when you implement your logic inside the MCP server, you can filter data, or you can change the behavior of the MCP server based, again, on who the user is. Plus the fact that if you are an ISV or a service provider providing the MCP server to multiple customers and multiple tenants, you can also use the authentication and the identity of the user consuming your MCP tools to do stuff like consumption planning, pay per use of your resources, and generally speaking, you can have a better understanding of the usage and do auditing and telemetry on an individual user or per customer basis. So definitely a better solution than just using anonymous access or static API keys to access an MCP server, because anonymous access and static API keys are the other options we have nowadays when it comes to consuming MCP with security in place. So that said, first of all, I will move to the actual demo of today, and then I will briefly come back to the slide deck to make a short recap of the steps we have been through. So this is the lab I was talking about, and you have the link inside the chat. And first of all, let me show you the MCP server in action from the agent perspective. So I'm in Copilot Studio. I have an agent that I already created, but then we're going to do it from scratch. And the idea is that I can rely on an MCP server like the one I have right here and that I'm going to show you right now, implemented using .NET Framework. And you can find the source code of this MCP server in the Copilot Camp lab. Here you can see I'm relying on the Model Context Protocol SDK to implement the actual MCP server. And inside the MCP server, we will come back later on this business logic. We have some logic to do authorization based on who the user is. So now in my Copilot Studio agent, I can see, for example, since this is an MCP server to manage a list of hypothetical candidates for an HR department, I can say list all candidates. And by triggering this prompt, my agent will start consuming the MCP server, but will do that in a secure way, as I will show you shortly. So now the agent selected to use the MCP server, selected to use the list candidate tool provided by the server, retrieved in JSON format the list of candidates, and gave to my end user in a nice looking way the output of the MCP tool request. If we go back to the server, we can see that in the console window of the server, we can see that we have got a request with a bearer access token. And actually, since this is running locally on my machine, I can also rely on a dev tunnel. And specifically, I can use the inspection of the dev tunnel to see and show you that I've got a request, which includes actually in the authorization a bearer token, which will give me information about who the user is as we can see right here, if I go to jwt.ms. And here I can see that I've got an access token for my user. So now I am consuming my MCP server for a specific application. Now, how can we do that in practice if we want to implement it from scratch? First of all, we need to rely on Entra ID, and we need to configure a couple of applications, at least once, but I rather want to create two of them. We need an application for the server publishing the MCP server tools, and we need to have a client or a consumer application which will be used by Copilot Studio to consume our server. In the MCP server application, I configured that this application exposes an API. So right here, I have a specific application scope that I defined, which is called hr.manage, can be whatever you like. This is the configuration of my scope. And I have a unique URI, which right now, since I'm using a dev tunnel, matches the URL of my dev tunnel. Then I configured from a client perspective, from a consumer perspective, that I have a specific application which is configured from an API permissions perspective to have the permission to use that delegated permission scope. So I simply said add a permission, I search for my API keys, or I can go here and search for HR MCP, and here I have my server, and I simply selected the permission scope that I configured before, and then I said that as an admin, I granted the admin consent for this specific permission scope. Plus the fact that in my consumer application, I also have configured a client secret, as well as a few settings from an authentication perspective that we will see again in a matter of few minutes from now. So I have an Entra ID application for the server, and I have an Entra ID application for the consumer of my server. Now I can go to Copilot Studio. For example, here I have an HR MCP consumer agent, which is actually an empty agent, but just for the sake of saving some time, I knew that this demo would have been squeezed a bit, so I pre-created my agent. I can simply add a tool, and I can say that I want to add a new tool of type model context protocol. Now, when it comes to configuring my tool, I need to provide the information about what the MCP server is. So something like the name, for example, which can be HR MCP with open authorization, a description, and of course, to speed up the demo, I'm just copying and pasting the values. Then I have to provide the URL where my MCP server is listening to, and then I need to configure my MCP server to use open authorization. When I do that, I have three options: the dynamic discovery, which will do all the magic by itself, dynamically but providing a bunch of URLs, or the manual one, which is the one I'm going to use. So here I need to provide the settings for my client application. So practically speaking, I need to provide the client ID of the application, the consumer application that I showed you before. I need to provide the client secret that I configured for my application, as well as I need to provide the authorization URL, which is the one of Entra ID, to go through the authorization flow, and the token URL, which is the one I use to get a token or to refresh a token, the same one. Then from a scope perspective, in my consumer application, you might notice that I have not only the hr.manage permission, but I also have few graph permissions. And those permission scopes are those that I'm going to use right now for the initial configuration of my MCP server in Copilot Studio. I'm interested in OpenID, profile, and email. By doing so now, the Power Platform behind the scenes is creating a connector, a custom connector for me, which will have all of the settings for my MCP server secured with open authorization. Once it will be ready, I will get back from the Power Platform a URL, which will be the URL that I need to use and copy in the authentication URL of my server inside the Entra ID. So let me copy this URL, and let me go back to the consumer. Under the authentication section, right here, I can add a redirect URI of type web, and I can provide the URL that I just copied from the Copilot Studio interface. Moreover, if I go to the list of custom connectors that I have in my environment, if I refresh this page, we can see that now we have the HRMCP with the OAuth that I just created. I can edit this item, and what I can do is to go to the security section, and in here I can edit the open authorization settings and specify that I want to have a specific resource URL for my for my target MCP server, which will be the unique URI that I configured in Entra ID. Plus, I want to have my specific permission scope, the hr.manage, instead of those generic from a graph perspective. Plus, I need to provide one more time the client secret, because whenever I edit this interface, I need to specify the client secret. So once I'm done with that, I can update my connector. I can then save these settings. And when it will be ready, I can simply go back to Copilot Studio and complete the configuration steps. So matter of few more seconds and we should be ready. And here we are. Let me go back and let me go back to my Copilot Studio agent. So I can simply say next. And now I need to connect to my target MCP server. So let's do the connection. It will be an open authorization connection. I will have to provide my identity. And of course, this is the identity that I'm going to use in my target tenant right now. So let me select this account. And eventually I will need to provide multi-factor. No, I don't need it now because it was already cached. Good, so we save some time. And now we are connected. So we can add and configure the MCP server and all of the tools defining the MCP server inside the configuration of my agent. And we are almost there. As soon as the agent will be configured with the MCP tools in place, we can start interacting with our server using the same experience that I showed you before. So here we are. It is now listing all of the tools, and in a matter of few seconds, here we are, we have all of the tools. So again, I can say in this new agent, list all candidates. By doing so, the first time an end user will use this MCP server, we'll have to allow Copilot Studio to use it, and we'll have to connect using the connection manager, so creating an actual connection for the current user. You select connect, you submit your connection request, so that you will be then connected. And once you are ready, you can come back, you can retry the request, or you can even, and here we are, we get the list of items, or we can just create a new session. Quite often, the very first time, it doesn't give you a thumbs up in the result, but now it should be good. List all candidates, it retrieved all of the list of candidates. I've got the output in a nice looking format. And if I go back to my server, I can see one more time that I've got a request here at the end of this console window with the open authorization token in place. Just one more minute, Visa, and here we have the implementation of the actual server, and inside the server, we ensure for every single request that we have the authorization scope we want to have, so that from a security perspective, the MCP server can validate if the request is coming with a proper delegated access token with a proper permission scope. So that said, this is just a recap of what you need to go through. I will copy and paste the image of this slide in the chat, and you can find all of the information in the Copilot Dev Camp.